Mmm, top of the morning to you, lass. Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather, and as always, I'm reading with a vengeance, and I hope you are as well. If you've been here before, thank you so much for coming back. If you're a new watcher, very warm welcome to you. I hope everybody's doing very, very well. How is everybody's reading? I am happy to say my November has started off much better than October did. So I'm very happy about that. I'm very excited to talk to you about the books I'm going to talk to you about. And today I'm going to talk to you about the books that I have read so far in the month of November. The first book I'm going to talk to you about today is The Majesties by Tiffany Sao. I discovered this little beauty in a little free library when I was visiting in San Diego probably 2 years ago. And I picked it up completely because of the cover. I thought this was the most beautiful cover. I'll share that with you. Look, it's just gorgeous. It's a little bit creepy if you look closely, but the colors I think are gorgeous. And I was hesitant to pick this one up because the average rating on Goodreads is fairly low, and I was a little bit put off by that. I know I shouldn't be, but I just was. So I was very hesitant to start this one, and I am so glad I did. This is tragically underrated on Goodreads. I was taken by surprise with this one. So this one opens up with a bang, and you find out immediately in the opening chapter that this whole family at a big family function is a big party thrown for the patriarch of the family. It's the grandfather's 80th birthday, and family members from all over the world have come to celebrate. So there's 300 plus people there. Well, somebody has, well, we know who it is, but somebody has murdered the entire family by poisoning the food. And you know who did it. You know it's Estella, and she has also died, and her sister Gwendolyn is the only survivor, and she's in a coma, and she is telling you this story. So she's in a coma, and she's going back in her memories trying to figure out why Estella did this, all the events that led to Estella going over the edge and murdering her entire family. So you follow Gwendolyn and Estella. They're sisters. They're very close. They are Chinese Indonesian. They come from a very wealthy Chinese Indonesian family living in Jakarta. You learn a little bit about the culture living in Jakarta, and you learn how there's a very large Chinese population there, and you learn about the racism between the Indonesians and the Chinese that I found fascinating to read about. They don't spend a whole lot of time on it, but you definitely learn about that. And you go back, and there's a couple of events that you follow in Estella's life. She's married to a man who is abusive, and you learn how that affects Estella and her personality and her relationship with the rest of the family, specifically Gwendolyn. Then there's also an aunt that they have, their mother's sister, who mysteriously disappears. She's supposedly dead. Supposedly she drowned in, I think, a boating accident. But there's something that comes up that kind of puts this mysterious shroud over her death. And so Gwendolyn and Estella kind of investigate that together. And you just go through their lives and how being in a wealthy Chinese Indonesian family affects their relationship and who they are as people. Specifically Estella, and you see the differences as Gwendolyn is narrating the story. You see how Estella is very much into being involved in family functions, which that's a really, really big thing in their family, in their culture. Everything is surrounding family functions. You're always going to somebody's birthday or wedding or baptism or something to do with new babies. It's very much frowned upon in this culture if you aren't as involved in all the family functions that go on. And so Estella is very much into that, where Gwendolyn has kind of pulled away. So she kind of is viewed as the black sheep of the family. So you see how that dynamic affects their relationship. And I found it very interesting. I found it fascinating. I found it very engaging. I found myself connected to Estella and Gwendolyn for different reasons. And then I was very much taken by surprise. There's a pretty good twist at the end of this book, and I did not see it coming. And that bumped this up from a 3.5 to a 4-star easily. It was such a great surprise. I will tell you that this is marketed as a mystery thriller. It is not a page turner in the thriller sense. There is a mystery, but I would put this down as contemporary fiction. But of course, also that twist at the end. I think that twist at the end is what makes it, I don't know, maybe a thriller, but I just wouldn't classify this as a thriller. But this was great. I gave this 4 stars. I hope I gave it a good summary for you to be intrigued by this. I felt like I was kind of walking on eggshells telling you about it because I don't want to give too much away. The one thing also I will say about this is there was this weird thing that Gwendolyn starts her own business, also frowned upon by the family, because the family has their own businesses and it's in their mind that everybody in the family works for the family business. But Gwendolyn goes off on her own and she starts her own business, and it's this weird kind of very minimal sci-fi element to it where she uses insects in fashion. And I know I won't be able to explain it well. It's very strange. I found it fascinating, but almost a little bit over my head. I mean, I was able to grasp it enough to understand what was going on a little bit, but I felt like that aspect of the story wasn't necessary because it just added this weird sci-fi element to it that just wasn't necessary to this story. It was interesting, and it was a unique aspect to the story, I guess. I don't know. I would love to hear what you think. If you've read this book and you know what I'm talking about, I would love for you to tell me your thoughts on that. And then if you do end up reading this book on my recommendation, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But anyways, gave this 4 solid stars. I would recommend. The next book I read in the month of November is The Curious World of Calpurnia Tate by Jacqueline Kelly. This is a YA middle grade book, and it's the second in a duology. And I listened to this book, and I listened to the first one, and I absolutely loved it. I believe I read the first one, The Evolution of Calpurnia Tate, last year, and I absolutely loved it. That was another one that took me by surprise. You're following Calpurnia Tate, and it's right at the turn of the century. She's 11 years old. It's 1899. She is from a fairly well-to-do family in Texas, and she lives with her mother and father and her, I believe, 6 brothers. She's the only girl, and her grandfather, rather eccentric grandfather, also lives in the household. In the first one, she isn't close with him yet. He's kind of a gruff, standoffish member of the family, and he's quite frightening. As a matter of fact, he's frightening to most of the family. But Calpurnia is very interested in science and nature, and through that, she develops a connection with her grandfather, because her grandfather is a scientist. And so when her grandfather discovers that Calpurnia is interested in that, he kind of takes her under his wing and starts to teach her, and they get to know each other, and they develop a close relationship that is very heartwarming and lovely. And then you learn things through the eyes of this 11-year-old precocious girl. And it's just fantastic. She's learning about insects. She's learning about different species of trees. They discover a new species of I think, tree in the first one. Meanwhile, she's dealing with her obnoxious, in her mind, brothers. The first one was very, very engaging. Absolutely loved it. And this carries on into the next year. It's 1900. She's turned 12. She's still basking in the glow of discovering this new species of tree the year before with her grandfather. She is mostly dealing with her younger brother, Travis, who she has a really good relationship with, but he gets into trouble by bringing home every stray, orphaned, wild animal that he comes across. A baby armadillo, baby birds, a baby raccoon. He brings them all home, and they create havoc in the home. Also, a veterinarian comes into town, and he is kind of looking to start his practice, and the Tates kind of welcome him in because they're kind of leading family in the town. And so they take him in and they bring him and have him over for dinner and kind of welcome him into the town. Calpurnia and Travis are both very kind of fascinated by the idea that there's an animal doctor. So part of the story is Calpurnia helping Travis with these wild animals that he brings home. And then you also follow Calpurnia as she develops a relationship with the vet and helps him in his practice and discovers that that's what she wants to do with her life. It was a lovely little story. It was very cute. Calpurnia is very engaging. She's funny. She's smart. She's sarcastic. She doesn't like the fact that, of course, being a 12-year-old girl at the turn of the century, she is not afforded the same rights and benefits of the male population as far as education. Even there's a part in the story where their father, the Tate's father, gives all of the Tate children an allowance. Calpurnia discovers that all the boys got $10 and she only got $5. It talks about how she deals with that, and I thought that was an interesting way to examine the divide between men and women and how they're treated specifically at that time. And through the eyes of an 11-year-old girl, I thought was a really great way to show that divide to the audience that this book is meant for, middle grade, young adult. So I appreciated that. I will say, considering that this is a somewhat middle grade book, there were some, and these aren't spoilers, I mean, you just kind of see it coming, you know, some of these animals that Travis brings home, some of them don't make it. So you're dealing with the, you know, the death of an animal that a character in the book has grown, you know, has grown to love. And so you as a reader kind of get a little bit of a connection if you do that. If you are the kind of reader that connects to animals in stories, you know, your heart breaks more than once during the story. And then it also breaks for Travis, who just is devastated every single time. Devastated. There is quite a bit of heartbreak in this story. And the other thing, too, is that because Calpurnia is kind of a scientist by nature, whenever one of the animals dies, she wants to know why. And so with the help of her grandfather, she does kind of her own, what is it called, a necropsy? But she does a few dissections of animals, and it's rather graphically described in this story that was it was unexpected. You know, I have a pretty strong stomach, but considering who this book was written for, it makes me wonder. So if you have a young child, just be aware of that. But that took me by surprise. Did I enjoy this as much as the first one? No, but I did enjoy it. Specifically the parts where Calpurnia is getting into adventures with her brother. I thought the dialogue was really well written. I did find out, I wanted to know if there was more in the series. It's been turned into an illustrated chapter book series. I think it's called Girl Vet or something, but Calpurnia continues on with her education to become a veterinarian, which I may check out. I gave this one 3 stars. The next book I read in the month of November was A Fairy Tale by my beloved Uncle Stevie. I was so excited to get into this book. I have many thoughts. If you have been watching my channel, you know that I am a big, big Stephen King fan. I have read most of his stuff. If you've been watching my channel, you also know that I have struggled with fantasy as genre. So to love Stephen King and to struggle with fantasy, this was an interesting endeavor. What is it about, Heather? So in this book, you follow Charlie. Charlie's 17 years old and he lives with his dad. His mom died when he was 7 years old. Not only did he have to grieve that, of course, his father grieved the death of Charlie's mom heavily, and he ended up turning to alcohol and just almost wrecked their lives with alcohol. It lasted for several years, I believe. So Charlie had to deal as a young boy, not only dealing with the death of his mother, but dealing with the fact that he kind of had to take care of his dad and take care of himself. So that shaped Charlie as a human being. Ultimately, his dad recovers, goes to AA, and they put the pieces of their lives back together. Now Charlie is 17. He is on the cusp of going off to college. And one day he is riding his bike by a house in the neighborhood, a house that is known in the neighborhood as kind of there's a reclusive old man that lives there. He's not very friendly. He lives there with his mean old dog, and nobody knows a whole lot about him. And one day Charlie is riding his bike by this house, and he hears the dog howling what sounds like to him that help is needed, that the dog's in distress. Being the type of person that Charlie is, Charlie decides to investigate, and what he finds is the old man, who is Mr. Bowditch, has fallen off his ladder in the backyard, and he's broken his leg. And Charlie calls 911. Mr. Bowditch is taken to the hospital and he's taken care of. And the fact that he's called 911 kind of turns him into a town hero, that he saved Mr. Bowditch. He and Mr. Bowditch become friends. Charlie ends up taking care of Mr. Bowditch's dog, Radar, and they become very close. And Charlie takes care of Radar and Mr. Bowditch's house while he is in the hospital. The first 200 pages of the story, when it's just Charlie and Radar and Mr. Bowditch, and was five stars for me easily. I was absolutely loving it. I blazed through the first 200 pages of the book. I absolutely loved it. And then it took a turn. During this time that Charlie is becoming friends with Mr. Bowditch has secrets. You know he's got secrets, and you know ultimately that he's going to share these secrets with Charlie. And also there's this shed in the backyard that is alluded to a couple of times, and you know something creepy is going on back there, something not quite right. So ultimately Mr. Bowditch dies and leaves Charlie a letter, and he shares with Charlie his deep dark secret, and he gives him kind of instructions. It leads Charlie to the shed. It leads Charlie on this fantastical adventure. The first part of that adventure I was also enjoying. It's whimsical, it's very fairy tale-ish. I was enjoying it, but the pacing for me started to stutter and lose momentum at this point. And the next 200 pages, they were difficult for me. I'm not going to lie. They were difficult when Charlie enters into this whole other world. And basically he is tasked with saving these people that are in this other world. I struggled. It just was too different. It turned into a completely different book. And I've seen other people say the exact same thing about this book. It just was too different. You know, thank goodness for Charlie and Radar. As characters, they were both fantastic. I absolutely fell in love with Charlie. I absolutely fell in love with Radar. I absolutely fell in love with the relationship they had with each other. You know, boy and his dog. I loved it. But there was a pretty heavy chunk of the book where Radar and Charlie are separated, and I just didn't care. I didn't really quite connect with the other characters in this other world. I had a hard time with it. I will say one thing about Stephen King. I'll admit, even though I'm a huge, huge fan, I love his books, he struggles with the endings. Not gonna lie. Either they're unsatisfying or they are abrupt. Not every single book, but a healthy portion of them, not gonna lie. This one actually I felt had a really good ending. Thank God. So by the end, I was, well, let's face it, I was happy to get to the end. I was done. I was ready for this book to be over. And it's so funny because I've seen other people review these books, or I've read other reviews on Goodreads, and the people who love fantasy, they basically say the first 200 pages was crap. It was so slow. I almost DNF'd. But as soon as, you know, we get into the fantasy part of it, they love it. And then the people who aren't so much into fantasy, like this girl, I absolutely loved the first 200 pages, loved it. And then once it got to the fantasy, I was like, ugh. So depending on what type of genre you're into, you're gonna have to make that decision on your own. Whether you love fantasy or not, if you love Stephen King, if you love his writing, I mean, that didn't fail here. I always loved his writing. You know, because it's Stephen King, I was always gonna read this one, but I will say I wanted to mention that I picked this one to read this month because it met a prompt for me for the Read Your Bookshelf Challenge hosted by Chantel Reads All Day. This is a year-long reading challenge where every month has a prompt. The prompt for November was pick a book that is cozy or feels like home. And reading Stephen King always feels cozy to me. The familiarity. I could be reading the worst horror ever, and if it's written by Stephen King, it just feels cozy to me. I don't know how to explain it any better than that, but it just does. So that's why I read this particular book this particular month. The other thing that I also will mention here that I thought was kind of funny as I'm reading it, there's a character in here in the fantasy world. His name is Iota, but he goes by I for short. And in the book, it's written E-Y-E, like eyeball. And I thought, if you're listening to this audiobook and there's a couple like where the dialogue was blah, 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 I said, you know, it's narrated by Charlie. So you would kind of have a hard time if you're listening to the book. If it said I said, you'd be hard pressed to figure out if it was Charlie saying that or Iota. I thought that was an interesting choice for Stephen King to give a nickname of I. You know, because in this day and age, you have to consider how it's going to be taken if you're listening to the book. Just something that I thought was interesting since I listen to audiobooks just as much as I read physical books, if not more. Anyways, I gave this 3.5 stars. It pained me to give a somewhat lowish rating to a Stephen King book. Like I said, the first 200 pages, I was fully thinking that I was going to be giving it 5 stars. And then I hit the fantasy part. And then it came down to 3 stars almost immediately. And I was really bummed that it was going to be a 3-star. That extra half star I gave for the ending. So yeah, 3.5 stars for my beloved Stephen King. The next book I read is Anya's Ghost by Vera Brosgold. This is a graphic novel that was an impulse checkout at the library. I now am going to a new library since I'm in a new town, and I went through their graphic novel selection. So I just happened to find this one and I pulled it off the shelf. I was looking for the third Heartstopper, but they didn't have it. And I really enjoyed it. This follows Anya here. She is, I want to say she's, I don't know, 14 or 15 years old. She's in high school. She is kind of an outcast at high school. She's got one best friend. She is the daughter of a Russian immigrant and she can't stand it. When she first came to the United States, she was bullied because of her accent and her last name. So she's very resentful of where she comes from. One day she is walking through the woods. She's not paying attention and she falls down this hole. And while she's down in this hole, she sees these set of bones and then she meets a ghost. And the ghost, I believe, her name is Emily, who has been down there many, many years, this ghost. And she has to stay close to her bones, which is why she's still down in this hole. It freaks Anya out, but Anya and Emily have this conversation. Ultimately, Anya is rescued from the hole with the help of Emily. A few days later, Anya is at school, and all of a sudden, Emily appears. It turns out that Anya had accidentally scooped up one of the bones into her backpack. She inadvertently brought Emily with her. At first, Anya is completely freaked out about it, but Emily and Anya ultimately become friends, and Emily kind of convinces Anya to help try to solve her murder, because that's the story that Emily tells Anya. So the story goes from there, and I enjoyed it. You're following Anya. She's somewhat bullied at school. She has a tenuous relationship with her mom. She has this crush on this popular boy at school who turns out to be not who she thought he was. Also, Emily is kind of helping Anya with her studies while actually helping her cheat on tests at school by whispering answers into her ear. The story is quite cute until it's not. It does take kind of a dark turn. And you can kind of tell from the cover there. I enjoyed it a lot. I didn't expect it to take this dark turn. I didn't expect it to get creepy, but it does. And it's actually kind of intense. There's a scary element to it. and I really, really enjoyed it. So if that's not something you enjoy, just be mindful with this. I don't want to give too much away, but I really enjoyed the turn this story took. I didn't expect it. I usually like a graphic novel to be colorful, but I really liked kind of the blue and gray tone that this one has. So I wouldn't characterize that as straight black and white because most of it is black and white, but there's almost like this deep violet tone to it that matches the story, and I really enjoyed that. The artwork I felt was simplistic, but still emotion comes across, which I always appreciate. So the story between Anya and Emily, I found that just entertaining enough, but this also deals with themes of racism and bullying that I thought were handled well. Somewhat, a little bit clipped, but we are dealing with a pretty short book, and it's also, you know, it's a graphic novel, so you can't, I don't know, getting too deep into those themes, I think is kind of a tall order, but I think it was handled quite well. If you're going to choose to write about those themes, you know, even if you just touch on them a little bit, if you do it well, then that's what matters. I gave this 3 stars. And finally, the last book that I have read in the first half of November is The Trials of Morrigan Crow from the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend. I have been trying to get to this book forever. And this is one of the books that I chose for my 22 books in 2022. And I finally got to it. And I'm so glad I did. I really, really enjoyed this book. This is a middle grade fantasy, I guess. I'm really kind of surprised how much I enjoyed this book. So a lot of people have said, and I think it's somewhere on the cover, yeah, by Time magazine, a Harry Potter-esque adventure, and a lot of people have compared this to Harry Potter. It's true. It's very Harry Potter-ish. The whole world, what the main character kind of, her background, what she goes through. Very, very similar. If you loved the Harry Potter series and you're looking for something similar, I absolutely recommend this. This follows Morrigan Crow. She is an 11-year-old girl. She was born cursed. What that means is that bad stuff happens when they're around. What that also means is that on her 11th birthday, 11th or 12th?
I can't remember if it's 11th or 12th. I know she's 11. Is she turning 12?
I can't remember. Somewhere around her 11th birthday, she will die. She knows this her whole life, and her father knows this her whole life, and because of that, she does not have a good relationship with her family because they've pretty much written off, I mean, why get to know and love this child if she's just going to die when she's 11 years old? So she's a very unhappy child. She's a very unpopular child. She's an unwelcome child. And ultimately, she's an unloved child. It's very sad. On the eve of her birthday, when she's supposed to die, she is visited by a mysterious man named Jupiter North. And Jupiter tells her that she has been bid upon to join the Wondrous Society. This happens every year where children are bid upon by different societies to come and train to kind of find their place in society. And nobody expected to come for Morrigan because she's going to die the next day. But Jupiter North comes from the Wondrous Society and bids on her. She has to pass 4 trials over the course of a year to become a member of the society. Very much like Hogwarts, very much Harry Potter-ish, but very unique in its own right. The characters are unique. They're very, very well fleshed out. I found the world building interesting. It wasn't, you're learning about how this other world works without getting too deep into it, which can turn into a slog, at least for me. It was very whimsical, very cute, very funny. I don't know how this was different than some of the other fantasy books that I've read, in that I was able to connect with that whimsical quality. You know, the talking cat, the riding a rail system using an umbrella. I was totally on board for that. So I had a really, really good time with this book. There's also a dark quality to this book because as Morrigan is in this world trying to go through these trials, there's this underlying fear that people are going to find out that she's a cursed child, because that's a secret. Nobody knows she's cursed. You know, if people find out that she's cursed, she'll be kicked out of Nevermore, which is the name of the land where all these trials are taking place. And then there's also this mysterious person that shows up several times throughout Morrigan's time in Nevermore. You don't know if he is friend or foe. He's very elusive and just mysterious. And Morrigan is conflicted about this guy for a bunch of reasons. And so I found that element to the story very engaging, and I wanted to know what is going on with this guy. So not only do you have the whole whimsical part of the story with all these interesting fantasy-like characters, and they're funny and all of that, and so much fun, and just the adventures that Morrigan goes on. You have that part of the story, and then you have this darker part of the story that I think is more engaging for maybe an older audience like myself. So those two things together just made this just such a fun ride. One of the things that I thought was really, really fun is when Morrigan first gets to Nevermore and she's shown to her room, which is in this hotel that Jupiter owns. And when she first gets to her room, it's just this room. It's 4 walls, a small window, a bed in the corner, a tiny bathroom, and there's nothing much to it. The longer Morrigan is there, the more this room kind of shapes to her personality. The window gets bigger, her bathroom gets bigger, her bed, it changes every day. One day it's a cot, the next day it's a hammock, the next day it's a futon, the next day it's this 4-poster bed with this ornate canopy. This hotel, this magical hotel, not just her room, but the rest of the hotel kind of grows on a day-to-day basis. And I found that element just so adorable and just so much fun to read about. And the other thing that I thought was really, really well done and such a good way to have young minds learn about the ways of the world is that the idea of Morrigan being a foreigner in this foreign land and being unwelcome because she's foreign, and how certain people view that, and just the idea, the politics of refugees and borders, foreign people coming into a new land to try to make a life for themselves. I thought that was handled and examined so well in this book. So my hat's off to Jessica Townsend for that. But other than that, I had such a good time with this book. I absolutely will continue on with the series. I'm super excited about that. I believe the next one is called Wondersmith. What a Wondersmith is explained in this book, and I found that fascinating. And as I'm reading, because you find out what Wondersmith is early on, what you think you know what it is, and then I was a little confused. I'm like, the whole next book is about Wondersmith, and I don't want to go too much into it because I don't want to spoil it, but it explains it by the end of this book. And anyways, yes, I'm super excited to get to the second one. And if you've been on the fence about reading this, pick it up. It's so much fun. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4 stars. So that is it. That's what I've read so far in the first half of November. I'm super pleased with my reading month so far. It is so much better than what October was. Huge sigh of relief. How is your reading going? I hope it is a good reading month for you. Have you read any of these books? I would love to hear your thoughts on them. Please feel free to comment or to just say hello down in the doodly-doo. If you're still watching at this point, I'd really appreciate it if you gave that like button a boop, and a subscribe would be wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.